The Mexican Revolution was a civil war that consumed Mexico from 1910 to 1920 that dramatically changed the country forever, whether it be politics, battle strategy, and reform. Now, the Mexican Revolution is a very broad subject with many things to talk about, so I'm going to focus on the war itself. Now, I'm going to chop up and talk about the war in three sections. The first being the actual revolution, which was from 1910 to 1911. Second being the counter-revolution, which was 1913 to 1914. And the rest would be Civil War, 1914 to 1920. Let's begin with some healthy background information. Okay, so in the early 20th century, life in Mexico was looking good, with large foreign investments, modernization, and an economic boom. The president that led this charge for Mexico was President Porfirio Diaz. This period of modernization, known as the Porfiriato, which was from 1876 to 1911. Now, everything seemed to be going well for the country. Only there was a few problems. The poor and middle class were being oppressed by the rich elite, and the country was being ruled by a dictator known as Porfirio Diaz. So, the Iron Tyrant, that's what I'm going to call him, was actually the longest running Mexican president, and re-elected himself over a dozen times after he abolished presidential re-elections. Irony. But anyway, we go into the first stage of the war, which was the initial revolution. So people are fed up with the totalitarian government by the eve of 1910. And so the Iron Tyrant throws the public a bone and says he'll host a fair presidential election against a growing popular literary revolutionary known as Francisco Madero. So election takes some time, and surprise, surprise, Porfirio Diaz wins by a landslide. Hold up, that can't be right. And it isn't. Not surprised. The election was rigged, and Diaz, adding insult to injury, threw Madero in jail. Madero was bailed out and escaped to Texas, where he called for revolution. And by that time, the Mexican people were ready to rock and roll and overthrow Diaz. Now, two important generals answered the call to war. One being a bandit named Pancho Villa in the north, and the other being an agrarian reformer known as Emiliano Zapata in the south. So a battle here and a siege there. By 1911, the Iron Tyrant threw in the towel and left the country for Europe. Madero rode into the capital, becoming president and starting handing out reforms. We're in the second stage of the war where stuff heats up. So by 1913, a new crony steps up, a general that served under Diaz. Victoriano Huerta had Madero and the vice president assassinated as he usurped power. This was known as the 10 Tragic Days. So dictator number 2, that's Huerta, comes in just when the people overthrew dictator number 1, Diaz. But dictator number 2 had his work cut out for him when two new revolutionaries joined Zapata and Villa in overthrowing Huerta. That being Venustiano Carranza and Álvaro Obregón. With the combined might of the Fantastic Four, Huerta threw in the towel and headed for Europe. So after dictator number 2 leaves, Carranza makes himself president because of his ego, and Villa finds a problem with this, and after a few heated arguments, civil war stage begins. So Zapata and Villa join forces, while Carranza and Obregón make their own alliance. The civil war came down to the Battle of Celaya, pitting Villa against Obregón, ending with Obregón victorious. So Villa is no longer a problem for Carranza, so he focuses on Zapata. An operation was undertaken against the agrarian leader, and on April 10, 1919, Zapata was assassinated. opposition eliminated, making way for Carranza and Obregón to fight. Obregón was getting angry that Carranza wasn't keeping up on his promises to him, and he had him assassinated on May 21st, 1920. Alvaro became new president. Obregón's presidency kind of signaled the end of the war. However, the Mexican Revolution is a war that didn't have an official end, and there are some that say the revolution is still going on today. Anyway, that concludes the history short on this subject. Now on to the next.